And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast here for the south coast of the Panhandle. Small craft advisories, northwesterlies at 25 knots, sea 7 to 8 feet, and northwest 20 to 25 knots on the central coast. North coast, west 15 knots, seas 5 feet. Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage, northwest winds at 10 knots with seas pretty slight there at about 2 feet. And Clarence Strait, northwest 15, seas 3 feet. For the day Thursday, small craft advisories continue here for the south coast. Out of the northwest, 25 to 30 knots. And for Clarence Strait, northwest at 15 knots. Central coast here, northwest at 20. And pretty light variable winds over the central and northern inside waters there at about 10 knots. And for the north coast here, west winds 15 to 20 knots. And for Kamishak Bay, right there, Barren Islands, gale warnings for the day on Wednesday. East winds 35 knots. Cook Inlet, northeast 15 to 20 knot winds with 3 to 5 foot seas, but up to 8 to 10 feet here for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay. Small craft advisories for the western North Gulf Coast. East winds at 25. For Prince William Sound, eastern North Gulf Coast, light variable winds at 10 knots. For the day Thursday, east at 10 for Prince William Sound, southeast 15 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, east at 20 for the western coast. And for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, southeast winds at 25 knots. Cook Inlet, south to southeast breeze at 10 to 15. And for the Alaska Peninsula, southeast winds 20 knots for the day on Wednesday. Seas running 3 to 7 feet. Bristol Bay, southeast at 30 knots there. And for Kodiak Island, east and southeast winds at 20 knots with seas 5 to 10 feet. And for Thursday, Kodiak Island, mostly south winds at about 20 knots, except southwest 15 in Shelikof Strait. And for the Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, seas running 3 to 6 feet. Bristol Bay, southeast at 20. Eastern Aleutians, for Unalaska Island, east winds 15 to 20 knots for Wednesday. Unimak Island, small craft advisories northwest at 25, seas 8 feet there. And for Adak-Anatka, northwest winds at 30 knots. And then 20 to 25 knot winds over Turadam-Chitka Island, Kiska to Shimia, west winds at 25 knots. And for Thursday, western Aleutians, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Adak-Anatka, south to southwest at 15 to 20, and the eastern Aleutians, west-southwesterlies at 15 to 20 knots, also with 4 to 6 foot seas. And for the Pribilof Islands, on Wednesday, east winds 20 knots, seas 6 feet. Small craft advisories here for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, south of Nunivak Island for southeast winds at 25. St. Matthew Island looking at a northeast wind at 20. Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island, east winds at 15 knots, and small craft advisories for Norton Sound. Southeast winds 25 knots there. And then for Tuesday, those winds drop off out of the east at 15 for Norton Sound, and St. Lawrence Island, south at 15, Yukon Delta Coast, southeast at 15, northeast 15 for St. Matthew Island. St. Paul, St. George, light variable wind conditions, seas down to 3 feet. And for Kuskokwim Delta Coast there, southeast at 20 knots. And for the far eastern Beaufort Sea coast here, looking at small craft advisories for west winds at 25 knots. Otherwise, southwesterlies 15 knots there for the central and east side. And for the western Arctic coast, east winds 15 to 20 knots, and the Chukchi Sea east-northeasterlies at 15 knots. And for the day Thursday, pretty light winds here for the Chukchi Sea out of the east or northeast at 10 knots. Western Arctic coast, west winds 15 knots, southwest 15 for the central coast, and the eastern Beaufort Sea coast getting a little more variable there. South at 15 becoming east at 15, Kaktovik demarcation point. And for tonight, this band of precipitation crosses the Brooks Range, mostly north of the mountains there, North Slope and Arctic coast. Stays dry over the central and the eastern interior all the way down to the Gulf of Alaska and the southeast coast. Gale force winds and rain coming across Kodiak Island, rain pushing all the way up to the Seward Peninsula by late tonight, and then winds picking up here on the back side of this weakening low, which tomorrow tracks up right over the eastern Aleutians for lighter wind conditions there. Rain chances increase here over south central Alaska, especially on the eastern and southeastern slopes of the terrain, with pretty good moisture chances all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast, dry and warmer over the eastern interior as well as the southeast coast. Outlook for Thursday. Highs in the 70s to lower 80s over the Panhandle, and highs in the 70s and 80s over the eastern interior. Rain showers here, south central Alaska, especially these troughs rotating around the low here now, pulling northward and continuing to weaken. Next front spreading some rain into the western and central Aleutians during the afternoon hours.